If you haven't gone there yet, go to brandonseniorseminars.com. There's a lot of good stuff on there. There's a creation seminar, there's some health presentations, and a few other things. And Jesus knows that we have questions. In fact, his disciples and prophets often had questions also. Jesus said in Matthew 7:7, "Ask and it will be given you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened." And have any of you ever had questions that somebody could not answer? Yeah, me too. And we're not going to answer all of the questions tonight because I'm not God, and there are some things that the Bible just does not specifically answer. But there are some things that we can get some pretty clear answers to. Basically, everything in life that you can be faced with, we can find some sort of example of that in the Bible and the questions regarding it. And I've been compiling the questions for about a month or so, and on Facebook, over the website, and a little while ago there was a downtown event here, and we had people fill out some questions. So between tonight and Friday night's presentation, we're going to answer the majority of them. And all of the questions are kind of characterized under the subject that we're going to be talking about tonight. Take a look at some of the questions that people have asked. One question was, why did God not help my family member with cancer? Another one was, why did he let me go through so much trauma from my near-death car accident in 1994? Another one is, why did you allow Lucifer to have so much power over mankind? And do you feel responsible for all of the lost souls? Why did Jesus say, "Why have you forsaken me," while being crucified? I like this one. Why did he make stink bugs? We're going to answer that question tonight from the Bible. And no, I didn't write that one because anybody that knows me, I don't like creepy crawlies. I just don't like them. Will we actually remember our loved ones in heaven when we see them? Will we know each other? Another one is, will we remember our lives here on earth? So all of these questions sort of are characterized or categorized under the same big overall question that we're going to look at tonight. And we're going to handle this one step at a time. And tonight's presentation is going to be a little more Bible study, a little more sermonical. But Friday night's presentation is going to be a little more loose, and it's going to be a little more rapid fire question and answer. But to have all of our big questions answered, we have to have the big picture. And tonight, many of our questions will be answered. And if you haven't been to the website yet, I have a Bible study series on there, One Step at a Time. It's an 11-part Bible study series, and that deals with sort of the emotional aspects of depression, discouragement, anger, bitterness, resentment. So it's geared towards helping that, and all of that is rooted into tonight's subject also. So we're going to take it one step at a time. The gist of the questions was this: why did you allow Lucifer to have so much power over mankind? And do you feel responsible for all of the lost souls? And of all of these questions listed here tonight, I did not write any of them. I didn't manufacture any of them. These are genuine questions from people that want genuine answers. And our answers can be found in a parable. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus often spoke in parables. And he was largely speaking to uneducated, agricultural, blue-collar people that didn't have the degrees and wouldn't have understood a lot of the theological deep things that he could have presented. So he often taught in a parable. A parable is a fictitious story that's used to tell truth. And he taught on the parable of the sower and the seeds. And the story is that the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a sower in a field. And the sower, the master, put good seed in the field, but then it says an enemy came in the night and sowed bad seed, and then he went away. And then one of the servants asks in Matthew 13:27, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares, or how then does it have weeds?" So this field is symbolically the earth, or even you could get more specific into the church. So if God only creates good things, where did the bad bad things come from. In the Master Answers, in verse 28, he said to them, an enemy has done this. So if you remember nothing from tonight's presentation other than that phrase there, that's what you need to remember. An enemy has done this. And we look around, we see all the wars taking place. How many of you have been kind of following what's taken place with ISIS overseas? I just read a horrible tragedy about a pastor over there that was burned, and then they took a hatchet to him and just started hacking away. Just horrible atrocities. Natural disasters, wars, how do we explain all this? This is your key for answering that question. An enemy has done this. But to have the questions answered, we have to understand the story of the enemy, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. So we're going to spend some time in Ezekiel 28. And I know we're filming here, but if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand, because this is a question and answer scenario. I want to be able to answer your questions. Ezekiel 28, God is speaking to Ezekiel here, and he's likening the characteristics of the king of Tyre with the characteristics of Lucifer. So he says, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty, speaking of Lucifer. And that may surprise some of us, because usually we think of the devil as a red guy with red leotards and horns and tail and pitchfork to poke the people back into hellfire, right? And that's not really the picture that the Bible paints. It says he was the seal of perfection. Believe it or not, Lucifer was created a perfect being, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. And I get to present this a lot as I walk and talk with people. And I always let people know, if you knew Lucifer in heaven, you probably would have wanted to be his friend. He was a good, perfect being that just had that charm. You've been around those people that just attract everybody. They're just genuinely good people. He was like that in heaven at first. Ezekiel 28:13, you were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, the topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. So he was created a very musical creature, and he was ordained with all of these precious jewels. Not at all the picture that most of us think of, like the comic book version of Lucifer. So keeping this in mind, the very next verse, or Ezekiel 28:14, it says, speaking of Lucifer, you were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. There's a little bit to unpack there. And as we go tonight, I'm going to give you a couple bonus answers that you may have heard or wondered that aren't even listed up here. First of all, it says you are the anointed cherub who covers. A cherub is a type of an angel. There's two types of angels listed in the Bible. There's seraphim and there's cherubim. Cherubim is plural for cherub. And he was an anointed cherub who covers. Lucifer was actually a guardian in heaven. And if any of you have ever seen, anybody seen Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones? Okay, this is what they were after in the movie, and that is an actual biblical artifact. I mean, not the one in the movie, but it's based on an actual biblical artifact. And this was placed in the throne room of the sanctuary. And inside the box was the Ten Commandments, Aaron's rod that budded, a pot of manna, Moses' law was on the outside, and on the top of it were these two angels, these two cherubs who covered. They covered the Ark of the Covenant. And this was symbolic of what actually was in heaven. And in the middle of these was what's known as the Shekinah glory, according to Hebrew tradition. By the way, Shekinah glory is not mentioned in the Bible. It's Hebrew tradition. But it's verifiable. So Lucifer was represented by one of these angels. And that may surprise some of us. That shows us really how far it was that Lucifer fell. He was right next, literally in the throne room in heaven, right next to God. He was a guardian in heaven. Says you were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. And if you have your Bible, I'm going to turn quickly. The midst of the fiery stones. We want to understand what the fiery stones are. Have any of you ever heard people use the Bible to prove that aliens exist? Anybody ever heard that? In Ezekiel, they attempt to do that. I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to read from Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4 says, "And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding in itself, and brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, outside the midst of the fire." Many people say, "Look, see that? It's talking about UFOs up in the sky." It's representative of God's throne room, just like this here. You can see that in Daniel chapter 7 also. So this really shows you how far it was that he fell. Any of you ever thought, well, if this person didn't act like this, I never would have acted like that. Or if this person didn't do that to me, I never would have said that in the first place. And right, Lucifer was in perfection in heaven, right next to God, and he still chose to sin. And he is a far more powerful being than we are. Ezekiel 28:15 says, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you." And this idea of iniquity is just a big fancy word for sin. Does it say sin or iniquity? Does it say it was found in him, or does it say it was put in him? It was found in him. So God, right away, we know God did not make a defective angel. He made a perfect being that sin welled up inside of him. And we're going to see how and why that was. Ezekiel 28:17. "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground, laid you before kings, that they might gaze at you." So it was his beauty that really caused this pride, this sin to well up inside of him. And we don't have a whole lot of particulars, but we can use our imagination a little. I don't know, maybe Lucifer in heaven walked by a reflection in the water one day, and he stopped and said, "Man, I am a good-looking guy. People ought to pay attention to me." And then it just kind of just ballooned from there and snowballed. And there's 3 places in the Bible primarily that talk about Lucifer before he fell. Ezekiel 28, Isaiah chapter 14, and Revelation. We're going to look at all 3 of those tonight. Isaiah 14:12 says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations." His name Lucifer right there. And you have to be careful because it's not in all translation. New King James, and a few others say Lucifer. It's the only place in the Bible it gives the name Lucifer. Anybody know what the name Lucifer means? It means light bearer. Yep, very good. And we have some bugs that are named after Lucifer, even lightning bugs. They produce a light that's called luciferus, light bearer. So here we can see that Lucifer actually at one point reflected the character of God. He's light bearer. Jesus, remember at one point he said, "I am the light of the world." And on the Sermon on the Mount he said, "You are the light of the world." And think of this like sort of the moon and the sun. Which creates the light, the moon or the sun? The sun, right? So does the moon create light or does it reflect light? It reflects the light. So we're sort of like the moons. Lucifer was like the moon. There he reflected the light or the character of God. And we can reflect God's character also, according to Jesus. So this gives you a little more insight into Lucifer, his character. He actually reflected the character of God at one point. But, for you have said in your heart, now count how many times the word "I" is used here. "I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit in the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." And here's where the problem began to be everybody's problem. See, Lucifer was no longer happy worshiping God. He wanted to be worshipped. He wanted the attention. And it all stemmed from his pride. It all stemmed. So let's review real quick. Did God create a defective angel or did he create a perfect angel? Created a perfect angel with the capacity to choose. And we're going to take a little more in-depth look at that. But because of his pride and his desire to be worshipped, the inevitable finally happened in heaven. And he began, again, the Bible isn't specific on all these things, but it gives us enough that we can sort of extrapolate. Likely he went to the angels, maybe one by one or small groups, and said, God, we worship him all the time. Maybe somebody else should get a chance to be worshipped. Or those 10 commandments that he made, they're kind of strict, aren't they? We really need to follow all 10 of those commandments. So going one by one, sowing these seeds of doubt, then the inevitable happened, and the war finally broke out in heaven. And here we have some sort of an idea of what it may have been like. Revelation 12, 7-9 says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Now, we don't know exactly what type of a war it was. Likely, I really don't think it was some sort of a war with weapons, physical weapons, because they're spiritual beings. Likely it was more of a war of ideas and ideals, who to worship, how things should be done. But either way, we think, well, God doesn't know what it's like here on planet Earth. He doesn't know what it's like to feel pain of separation or to lose someone. War started in heaven. It didn't even start on planet Earth. It began in heaven. And then because of that, the angels were cast out. So we need to transport ourselves back in time into the Garden of Eden. So he and a third of the angels, he was able to deceive a third of the angels. Do you think he'll be effective in deceiving many of the people on planet Earth? I think he may be. But we don't have to be deceived because God's given us the Bible to go by. So where was he cast to? Was he cast down to earth, or was he cast into some other dimension or some fiery pit? Where does the Bible say he was cast to? Cast to the earth. And verse 12 says, "Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has but a short time." So heaven's problem now becomes Earth's problem, and we need to transport ourselves back to the Garden of Eden and see how this came about. In the Garden of Eden, how many trees were there in the Garden of Eden? That's right. Most people will say 2 trees. There were a whole bunch of trees. There was a whole garden. But there were 2 trees that we're going to pay special attention to today. There was the tree of life, and as long as they had access to that, they would live forever. We were not designed to live and die a measly 70 years or whatever the average is now, 73. We were designed to live forever, for eternity. And there was also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, you can eat of every tree, but not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" See, the devil gets an E for effort, because he hasn't changed his tactics in 6,000 years. He still gets us to question God. And that's what his intention was with Adam and Eve. He didn't have to outright lie. He just had to get them to question. Did God say you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden." By the way, what kind of fruit was it? Was it an apple? No, we don't know. Apples get a bad rap, I like apples. And that's why they call it the Adam's apple, right? Because he ate the apple and then it got stuck. It wasn't an apple, but that's, I was into apples that day, so I put an apple up here. And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." Now, how many of you notice a problem right off the bat there?
I didn't say anything about touching it.
You're right. God never said don't touch it. He said don't eat it or you'll die. She's already getting a little fuzzy on what God actually said. So imagine the serpent here, right? He's eating, probably holding up the fruit and saying, "Look, I ate it. I'm a talking serpent, for crying out loud. I'm touching it. I'm not dead. Look at me." So now the obvious question would be, all right, if God could see the end from the beginning, if he's all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, why in the world would he put that tree there in the first place? If he didn't put the tree, see, we put the blame on God, don't we? If he didn't put the tree there, we wouldn't have all these problems, and it had to be a test. God had to see, he had to give us the option to disobey him, because obeying him doesn't mean anything if you have no choice. So he had to give us choice. We're going to talk about choice here in a little bit. Yes, question.
Maybe he did that because he saw what Lucifer did in heaven. He made a choice not to, you know what I mean? Like, he made a choice.
Okay, let me repeat it for the camera because I have the microphone. The question was, did God give Adam and Eve basically the same test as what the test was given in heaven? Is that the gist of it?
Kind of. I mean, like, he saw what Lucifer did, so I guess he might have been wondering, would his children on earth do the same thing?
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And again, without the option not to obey God, obeying him really means nothing. And you're right, you're exactly right on. Because let's face it, God, he could have snapped Lucifer out of existence. He could have prevented it. He could have never created him in the first place. And you and I, we're not all knowing, all powerful. We don't see the end from the beginning. So we'd have messed everything up anyway. So that's why we have to understand that God sees everything. He has to allow these tests, and you're going to see why. The serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die." The very first outright lie on planet Earth. Notice how it escalated. Questioning God, and then it went to an outright lie, which led to disobeying God. And here you have two problems that have been plaguing mankind ever since then. Three things are wrapped up here. One is understanding what happens when you die. It says you will not surely die. God says you disobey and you will die. The other one is, it has to do with diet. Ever wonder why diet is so hard to conquer? The devil knows that he can manipulate us through that. And number three is, the whole gist of this is, you can disobey God and there's really no consequences. That's what he's hoping, that we would become immortal sinners and suffer the wrath of God, just like he suffered. So again, the question is still wondered, why did God create the devil in the first place? Why did he give us the power of choice? I don't know about you guys. I've made some dumb choices in my life. And I wish I could go back and undo some of those choices. But the fact is that we can't. And he has given us the greatest freedom in the universe. And that's the freedom to be wrong and the freedom to mess up. The freedom to choose. And let's think of it with a puppy. Now, those of you that have kids, or maybe even have a dog, I know there's some people here that have dogs. I have a dog, and I love that little girl. And why would you get a real dog instead of a robot dog? A robot dog, it's not going to chew the furniture. You're not going to have to clean up after it, especially right after you shampooed the carpet, right? You're not going to have to wake up in the middle of the night and take it out. Why in the world would anybody choose a real dog over a robot dog? And you know why it is? Love. Love. Yeah. Now you see, when I showed this, every single one of you, your hearts melted because you all went off all at the same time. Now, none of you did that when I showed this robot dog. Why not? I know there's some cute computer nerd that's going to watch this on video, and he's going to go, I'd rather have the robot dog. But we want the real thing. Why? Because, like you said, the real dog can love you back. And even though you know darn well you're going to have to clean up after it, you're going to have to spend time training it, you're going to have to pay for vet bills and everything else, but that little thing can love you like nothing else can. And for that matter, how about a robot child? How many of you, now I've got to be careful to answer this because some of you maybe would rather have a robot child. A robot child, you could program it to make the bed in the morning. You could program it to, put the toilet seat down and all of that stuff. But why would you choose a real child over a robot child? And the real child, again, can love you like nothing else can. Why would any human choose the real child over the robot child? The real child, you're going to have to change its diapers. There's going to be hospital bills. There's going to be tuition. I heard once that somebody estimated the amount of money a parent will spend on a child by the time they're 18 or through college is about $1 million. I don't know how accurate it is, but it sounded good to me at the time. But, you don't want the robot child that's programmed to just do whatever you say and nothing else. You want that little girl that, you have your nice white shirt on that you had just had dry cleaned, and then you see her running with chocolate all over her face and snot running down, and she jumps at you, wraps her arms around you, and rubs her face right in your white shirt, and then she looks up to you and says, "Daddy, I love you." That's why we choose the real over the robot. So God He couldn't make us robots because robots can't love. Only real living beings can love back. Now, I'm going to give you another bonus question. I did insert this one in here. What is the meaning of life? And I've beat all of the philosophers. I've figured out the meaning of life. And every time I say this, people go, "Yeah, right, what is the meaning of life?" And then once I tell them, they go, "Oh, yeah. The meaning of life is family. It's love. Think about it. Why were you created? God created you so He could love you. He created you so you could love Him back. In the Garden of Eden about Adam, God said, "It is not good that man should be alone." We're created to love each other and love God. That is the meaning of life. And even in the Bible, it says God is love. Love is what it's all about. We're going to see how that was demonstrated in a little bit. Back to our story with the serpent and Eve. For God knows, and this is the serpent speaking, "For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Again, the devil gets an E for effort. He hasn't changed. He sounds like a drug dealer here. He sounds like, well, there's something better. God just doesn't want you to have what you could have. All you have to do is disobey Him, and you'll have a much better life. He said, "You'll be like God." What did Satan want in the beginning? He wanted to be like God. And understanding that, you grasp the overview of the entire Bible, what it's all about. The devil wants your worship, and God deserves our worship. Your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. We were never designed to know evil. Heaven was never designed to know evil. But since Satan chose to sin, they knew evil. And since he came down here, and our original parents, Adam and Eve, chose to sin, now we know evil. But it wasn't in God's original plan. They didn't have to fail the test. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate." Now the problem started. Adam and Eve were designed to be together. Evidently, Eve had wandered away from Adam, found herself a little too close to temptation. See, that's what the devil tries to get us to do. Tries to pick us off, just like a lion going after a zebra or something. He doesn't jump right into the middle of the herd. He goes to the one that's going off away from the herd. So he tries to separate. He divided the family. You never wonder why Satan attacks our family so hard? He knows he can conquer like that. Where was I going with that? So Eve wandered off and a little too close to the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And it was there that she succumbed to the temptation. By the way, it's not a sin to be tempted. It only becomes sin when we act on that temptation. And she did, and then she gave it to Adam, who ate with her, who ate also. Everybody gets on Eve about sinning also. Did Adam have to follow suit? No, he didn't. He should have. They're both to blame. That's right. Men and women, we're all in this together. There was a guy I was asking questions on the street, and I was asking a guy, write something on the board here for me. I had a board that they could write the questions, and his question was, I couldn't get him to write it down because it would have been such a good one. He said, "Why did God create women? We'd never be in this mess without them." Right. It's not the women, believe me. Adam probably messed up in the first by letting her out of his sight. So we'll put the blame back where it belongs. Genesis chapter 3:17. So now as a result of sin and disobedience from God, and now they felt shame, human felt shame for the very first time. They were naked and ashamed. And have you ever noticed when we choose to sin, we feel that shame. We know darn well that we have done something wrong. And we feel that we feel the Holy Spirit leading us that we have done something wrong and we need to do something about it. Adam and Eve, their initial reaction also was to run and hide. You can't run and hide from God. And then God asks a question, where are you? It's not as though God was like, I just created them a little while ago. Where did they run off to? He knew where they were. Anytime you see God asking a question in the Bible, you pay a special close attention to that question because he's getting us to think.
As you're
Yes.
saying that, I'm thinking in my mind, the oldest game I can think of is hide and seek. And I think, that's so true. They hid and God sought them out.
Oh, that's right.
Went after them. But that's such an old game. I don't know when that never existed, but it always has. We seem to have this innate, inborn kind of desire to hide, and have somebody come and find us.
That's right, yeah.
That's an old feeling.
Maybe that was the very first game
Maybe
ever.
The first game of hide and seek.
There we go. First game of hide and seek. Yeah. So they began to, they realized their nakedness, and then they clothed themselves with fig leaves, and then God actually clothes them with animal skin. And we're in the question and answer time. Here's one. You ask me later, where did God get the animal skin from? Genesis 3:17. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So sin changed absolutely everything. Vegetation, the earth, the animals, people, nothing. What we have today is not even a shadow of what God's original intention for planet Earth was. Everything changed. And in the Garden of Eden, they ate fruits, nuts, and grains. They didn't even eat vegetables. How many of you like to cook? I don't like to cook. Guess who gets stuck with all the cooking in my house? I'd have been great in the Garden of Eden. Everything was fast food. Right? You just go, pick it off the tree, eat it, and go. It's fast food. But then they had to start digging for their food, and Genesis 3:18 says, both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. So they had to start digging and had to start working for their food. And their bodies, everything changed. They started to need the nutrients that they could no longer get just on the fruit, nuts, and grains. So they had to start to... Much of our medicine comes from vegetables, from leaves and other things. Do you have a question?
What did the serpent look like?
What did the serpent look like? That's a good question. The Bible, they didn't have cameras back then that we know of. Likely it wasn't like the same type of serpent that we had today. Some wonder if did the serpent fly because it was cursed to the ground. And it was a beautiful creature. Satan would have used the most appealing thing to all the senses that he could have, just like he does today with entertainment. So we don't really know, but it would have been something to see, I'm sure. Good question. Why did he make stink bugs? Now we're going to answer this question. I know you've been waiting for this one. Why in the world did God make stink bugs? Let's take a look here. First, let's answer a few things. You could also wonder, why did God make cactuses? Why did God make spiders and spider web? Just this morning, I got up and I was walking through the kitchen. I walked into a spider web in my house. Why did God make snakes? Let's break this down little by little. Likely, much of the creation that we have is not the same as it was originally intended in the Garden of Eden. The cactuses, and I've lived out among the cactuses. I used to live in the desert. All the prickly, pointy things, those are designed to catch moisture, or they have been at least adapted to catch moisture. There are even lizards that have the same principle. They have spines all over them, and the moisture comes down. They have channels on their skin. It runs down and goes right down the side of their mouth so they can drink. They never drink water other than that. That's how they get their moisture. Why did God create spiders and spider web? Likely, maybe the spider webs originally designed that they caught seeds in the wind. And the spiders injected their venom into the seeds to break it down so they could consume it that way. Snakes, they didn't originally go after people and snakes or other snakes and rats and eggs and other things. And their venom, likely they injected that into fruit to break it down so they could consume it. But then ever since sin came, everything changed and their dietary needs changed, and then animals started going after each other. And likely it's the same thing for stink bugs. And they're not even native to this continent. I've just read that they have only been here and in Pennsylvania since 1998, I believe. And I was out west in California, they had stink bugs out there, and believe me, you got the good ones here, because they're bigger and badder, meaner and uglier out there. And I don't like them. So the answer to why did God make stink bugs? He didn't make them the way that they are now. They weren't a nuisance. They weren't so stinky. Thank you. Why did he let me go through so much trauma from my near-death car accident in 1994? This is a big question. And this is a pretty specific question. I put this up here for a reason. God's interested in the specifics. He's not just interested in the big overall questions. Why did he let me go through so much trauma in my near-death car accident? But to answer this, we got to answer one or two other questions before we answer this. And we have to see Genesis 3:18, back to our story in the Garden of Eden. The very first prophecy, God is talking to the serpent. He says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed." Notice how seed's capitalized there. "He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." So God had a plan of salvation ready to be put into action just in case Adam and Eve failed in their test. And he knew that they would fail, but he had to give them the opportunity. And you still think, I gotta answer another question. I'm still not happy with why did God allow this in the first? Why did he allow a test like that, the option not to love? Think of it this way. I've been married. My wife and I have been together for 15 years now. And she tells me she loves me every day, and I tell her I love her. But what if I duct tape her mouth and hog tie her and throw her into a closet, and every once in a while I open up the door and I pull back the duct tape, feed her, and I say, "Do you love me?" And she shakes her head, and I said, "Okay," and then close her and put her back in there. Does that mean a whole lot? No, because she has no choice but to stay there. She has no choice. She can't leave. But the fact that she stays there, even though she has the freedom to come and go, says a whole lot. You cannot truly love unless you have the option not to love. You know what forced love is called? It's called rape. And God will never do that to us. Imagine it this way. Imagine I break into your house in the middle of the night tonight, and I hold a gun to your head and I say, "Cluck like a chicken." Yeah, I bet you'd start flapping your arms and you'd cluck like a chicken pretty darn quick. And I said, "Bark like a dog." You'd probably do the best dog you could come up with. But if I held a gun to your head and I said, "Love me with all your heart," could you do it? You couldn't. You cannot force love. Has to have the option not to love. Jesus demonstrated the ultimate love by choosing to come and die on the cross for us. And here you have the prophecy, between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. When did that happen? Happened at the cross. The serpent quite literally struck Jesus' heel by putting spikes right through his legs. But Jesus defeated the serpent by actually going through with it. He crushed the serpent's head by dying on the cross. And ever since then, he has been defeated. That is the most crucial point in the entire history of the universe, was that moment at the cross. Now we have something called sin on planet Earth. Why did Jesus say, "Why have you forsaken me," while being crucified? I get this question quite a lot, actually. And we have to understand this. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Every single one of us has sinned. And the wages of sin is death. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. That's why the devil is attacking us so hard. That's why he's enticing us to sin. He wants you to die. He wants you, and he doesn't even care if you die an earthly death or not. He wants you to die an eternal death. He wants you to exist no more with God. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So there's only two choices ever. There's only ever two choices, life and death. You follow the devil, you get death. You follow Jesus, you get life. Now, why did Jesus say, "Why have you forsaken me," while being crucified? I'll give you two options, and you can take the best one that you like. Mark 15:34, and at the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? If Jesus is God, then why did he cry out and say, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was quoting Old Testament scripture, Psalm chapter 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? And everybody standing around there would have known this prophecy, because this was a prophecy of the sufferings of the Messiah. And he recited that to draw their attention back to the scriptures, not to put it on the emotions of what he was going through, but so they could see biblically this is what had to take place. Reason number one why he said that. Reason number two, Isaiah 59:2 says, but your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he will not hear. Reason number two is Jesus had felt separation from the Father for the first time in his existence. Why? Because he had the entire sin of the world on him at that point. God cannot be in the presence of sin. Jesus actually didn't want to go through with the cross. At the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, if possible, let this cup pass from me. In other words, I just assumed not go through with this. And it wasn't even the physical torment he was worried about. He wasn't worried so much, I'm sure it crossed his mind, the whipping and the crucifixion. It was bearing the sin of the world and being separated from his Father that he could not bear the thought of it. And God answered no. He said, so sometimes we get an answer no to a prayer. It's okay. God even gave Jesus no, an answer to prayer. He had to go through with it. He had to die. Why did Jesus let me go through so much trauma in my near-death car accident? Now we're starting to see why. If God could not spare his only son from trauma like that, then he certainly can't spare us from it. And it is the result of sin. God doesn't say, okay, I'm going to make this person go through a car accident and die today. That's not what he does. He withdraws, she said Satan does. It's right, Satan does that. God withdraws his protection and allows Satan enough chain, enough rope to hang himself. So he has to allow. If God protected everybody through everything, then the devil would have one more accusation against him. See, that's why people worship you, because you do everything for him. You withhold all trauma and everything. Just like the story of Job. There was some sort of heavenly council meeting, and Lucifer was called to be a part of it. By the way, he came from planet Earth. Said, where have you come from? From roaming to and fro on Earth. And they begin this conversation. Take Job, for example. The only reason he worships you is because you give him everything. The guy's wealthy, has a great life, great family. And he said, take that from him and he'll curse you. God gave him, the devil, permission to attack him. And he said, you can take his family, but don't take his health or his life at this point. And he lost everything. He lost his animals, he lost his health. Satan called down fire from heaven. And servants were coming up to him, telling him, we've lost your family, we've lost your house, everything's gone. And then he says, naked I came into this world, and naked I will go out. And he still didn't curse God. There's another heavenly council meeting. Where have you come from? From roaming to and fro on earth. Take Job, for example. He only worships you because you give him. He has great health still. Take his health and he'll curse you. He says, fine, attack his health, but don't take his life. Boils all over his body, and he did not curse God. His wife did. His wife said, curse God and die. There's a good support system right there. You think you have problems in your relationship. But he didn't. He stood strong for God. And God blessed him because of it. He got children back. He got his agriculture and everything back because he was faithful. More than what he started with. Yep. So we may not understand what we go through when we're going through it, but we have to trust. See, we see just kind of this, but we have to trust that God sees the entire thing. And while I may not be able to answer this question specifically, we know God has some bigger plan in mind to allow us to go through things like that. Why did God not help my family member with cancer? I can give you two answers on this question also. I know this hits home. I know there's some survivors of cancer right here in this room right now. And there's two options here. I'm going to give you option 1 first and then option 2. Option 1, Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. This is in context of the second commandment, bowing down and worshiping idols. Anything can become an idol to us. Whatever drives our attention and our desire more than God, that becomes an idol to us. Cigarettes, work, alcohol, improper diet, all of these things are things that we pass down in our genes to our family members. And our lifestyle can activate these cancer cells in us. We all have the tendency, from what I understand, to get cancer. And there are things that we can do to improve, and there are things that we can do to actually bring some of that on. So part of this, if I lead a lifestyle of pure sin, drinking, smoking, alcohol, you name it, doing everything I can essentially to hurt my body and destroy the temple of God, it would be irresponsible of God to take that away from me, because then I would continue in that path. Does that make sense? That's kind of a hard thing to understand, but now let's take the other side of it. So there are some that kind of, I hate to say it like this, but sort of, I shouldn't say ask for it. They do things that bring on the diseases. Other one is, what about children? Children, how do we explain why God allows little children to die from cancer? Or people that have been good and healthy in their whole lives and they just keel over and die? Why does God allow that? It is the result of sin. You just remember that verse that we looked at from the beginning, an enemy has done this. So keep that in mind. It is the result of sin. God does not cause this, but he has to let this whole thing run its course for his name to be vindicated. And just like Job, there are still going to be those of us that no matter what, will glorify God in what happens. Revelation 14:12. Here are the patience of the saints, here are they that keep the commandments of God. And we looked at sin. The definition of sin is breaking God's law. There will always be God's faithful people that will follow him and will be his obedient people. So just remember, it kind of may seem gloomy and heavy, but God always has his faithful people also. So is this going to go on forever? Nahum chapter 1 verse 9. What do you conspire against the Lord? He will make an utter end of it. Affliction will not rise up a second time. So if you've ever wondered, okay, well, let's say I'm in heaven for 60 million years. Am I going to be the one that starts this mess all over again? Am I going to be the one to sin? Sin will not rise up the second time. Once this mess is decided and done, everybody will be convinced and will not choose to sin anymore. How is that going to happen? Because the tempter will be gone. Back to our story where we started in Ezekiel 28. You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading. Therefore I brought fire from your midst. It devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all who saw you. Who's this talking about here? It's talking about Satan. It's talking about Lucifer. A fire will be brought from his midst. All who knew you among the peoples are astonished at you. You have become a horror and shall be no more forever. There's going to be a time when there's no more cancer, when there's no more car accidents, when there's no more pain and suffering. It will come to an end. And you may wonder, well, why does the devil attack me? What did I ever do to him? The devil couldn't care less about you or not. He doesn't care if you live or die, frankly. But he hurts you because he knows it hurts God. He unleashes his wrath on you because Jesus cannot stand to see us in pain, just like one of your children. Now, you can call me names and hit me or whatever, and my wife says I don't take things seriously enough, but you do that to one of my children, and that's a different story. Same thing with God. Now the big overall question, we started in the beginning, why did you allow Lucifer to have so much power over mankind, and do you feel responsible for all the lost souls? God did not allow Lucifer to have power. Humankind forfeited that power to Satan. In fact, Satan is called the god of this earth in the Bible. Did you know that? He is the representative of planet Earth at this point. Do you feel responsible for the lost souls? God doesn't feel responsible. He feels sorry. He feels sorry that there are people that choose not to love him, not to follow him, that choose to follow the devil. So he doesn't feel sorry because he is perfect. He hasn't made any mistakes. He just feels loss when somebody has made a decision by the end of their life not to follow him. Now, on a better note, will we actually remember our loved ones in heaven when we see them? Will we know each other? And the good news is there is a heaven, there is a New Jerusalem, there is perfection around the corner waiting for us. Will we know each other? And the simple answer to that is yes, and that's proved biblically here, 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. So just as we know each other here, just as God knows us, we will know God in heaven. There are things about God we just aren't going to know on this side of heaven. Everything we need to know will be revealed to us here and in heaven. So we will know our loved ones. Now, as I talk to people and they're so fearful of, well, if I get to heaven, am I going to know my spouse? Am I going to know my family? Of course you will. God said it is not good that man should be alone. The first thing we do when we get to heaven is He's not going to start handing out divorce papers. He's not going to start separating families. The devil's the one that does that. Every good thing on planet Earth will be enhanced in heaven. Will we remember our lives on earth? Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Somebody just asked me this question the other day. Am I going to remember anything from planet Earth? You will not remember anything that bears the mark of sin. Everything sin-tainted will not come into mind in heaven. Revelation 22:3 says there will be no more curse. Anything that has been tainted or affected by sin will be wiped away. All of the good things you will still remember. Again, God's not in the business of brainwashing and erasing, but He is in the business of healing. And that's how He's going to have that healing. What would you ask God? Now we want to have a brief time of question and answer time. Yes, we have a question.
Why does God need to have all this sin play out in the first place?
Okay, that is a good question. And I was hoping somebody was going to answer that, or ask that question. Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7 says the time of His judgment is come. And that's a reference to the judgment, and you can look at that at two ways. Either as God judging us and the time of judgment beginning, or God's judgment for Himself beginning also. Lucifer placed the accusation on heaven at the beginning. You're not fair, you're unjust, and this whole thing, which is often referred to as the great controversy between good and evil, this whole thing has to be played out sort of like a big, long, giant courtroom drama. And it has to prove to the entire universe that no matter what, people will follow God, and God was right the entire time. So He cannot allow it to come to an end until everybody is satisfied with that answer. Because if He ended it right now, Lucifer would be able to say, you know what, that person, she didn't have her questions answered, that's not fair, and so on. So everything has to be legalized, essentially. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If you have one still, raise your hand and let me know. Next time, what would you ask God? Let me give you a sneak preview of the sort of questions. And again, next time it's going to be a little more rapid fire, question, answer. So if you have a question, it's not too late to get it in. How and why did God create this world? Are there ghosts? Do people go to heaven when they die? When are you coming? That's a good question. I love that question. Why did God make men so different from women? Will my pet be in heaven? This is one of the most common questions I get, and we're going to see biblically the answer for that question. Next time, invite a friend also. There's still room in here. There's still time to tell some friends and invite them. Did everything make sense tonight? Okay. Why don't we take the time and ask the Lord's blessing as we part from here. Father in heaven, thank you for this time that we could come together. And we thank you that you provide some answers to some very difficult and relevant questions. And we thank you that you did not create some defective being named Lucifer or named Satan, but you created a perfect being named Lucifer and unfortunately chose to become the devil. God, we ask that you would continue to guide us, that in all things we would choose you and that we would not choose the devil. that you would guide us through the Bible, that we would continue to find answers to the biggest questions. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.